often going on about how Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are not separate. Always I am going on about how the narrative in Genesis 2 is the correction to the narrative in Genesis 1. I'm always saying this, and I have in past episodes, and I just figured now would be the time because our previous meeting together sort of is pushing us towards this direction, which is another fascinating conversation or dialogue to have, because once that is seen, how that transition from Genesis 1 to Genesis 2 takes place, well, then a whole lot can come into the fold and into the picture of the ideal situation that the mind within the scriptures would have our mind acknowledge. So what I want to focus on is from out of the dust of the ground. That's how Adam was formed, from out of the dust of the ground. Now, I want to make mention of the Genesis chapter 1, the first 2 verses, how the creation actually begins. The creation actually begins in chaos. The creation begins in chaos. There is an earth that is void and all this other stuff that then trickles down to the reformulation, and then to the repopulation, and to the regeneration of mankind for that specific world or realm that's being created. Genesis 2 kicks in, and Genesis 2 is a creation of its own, with animals of its own, with male of his own. But it's a different kind of creation, yet similar situation, because the landscape therein is also a bit void when you enter into that. Now, you look at Jeremiah 42:23. The same language used in Jeremiah 42:23 is the same language used in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2. Jeremiah 4:23 says, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. This is the same language. This is the same language from Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2. Same language. But in Jeremiah chapter 4, we actually understand the earth that the prophet is writing about. Jeremiah 4:23 says, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. What is this earth? Jeremiah 4 and verse 10, verses prior. Jeremiah 4 and verse 10 reads, Then said I, Lord God, surely thou hast greatly deceived this people and Jerusalem, saying, You shall have peace, whereas the sword reacheth unto the soul. The earth that was made void is Jerusalem. The earth that was made void is Jerusalem. Genesis chapter 1, verses 2, having the same language of Jeremiah 4:23, this lets us know that the entire scope of Genesis chapter 1 is not alluding to a literal creation, because what is without void, without form, is not a literal earth, but is the earth of a particular Jerusalem. That's Genesis 1, verse 2. And that's the frame that the author of the book of Genesis, that the mind inspiring the Bible wants the individual going through the Bible to know, is that when they jump into Genesis 1, it's really not about a literal creation. It's about a workmanship for a recreating of a Jerusalem. So, and as we go along, you're going to see why that's important concerning what goes on in Genesis chapter 2. Genesis 1, I'm saying all of this because creation does not take place without chaos. Creation does not take place without bringing something from out of nothing. If this is the state of creation in Genesis 1, and you're entering into Genesis 2 and you're seeing a state of creation, well, then we have to, and it is fair to assume, and also to conclude, based off of how the author of Genesis 1 is treating the situation, that the context of Genesis 2 is the same. And that just as the without form and without void is going on in Genesis 1, well, that's the same situation, because creation only takes place from chaos and from nothing, according to the mind doing the creation, within the scriptures. So when you enter into Genesis chapter 2, you have to pay attention to the setting. You have to pay attention to this setting in Genesis 2. I'll just read that. Genesis 2, 4 through 6. Genesis 2, 4 through 6. Genesis chapter 2, verses 4 through 6. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, and every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was not a man to till the ground. But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. Notice Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1, God created the heavens and the earth. It doesn't say the Lord God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 1 verse 1 says God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis 2 is a creation not by God. Not by God, but by the Lord God. Genesis 1:1, God created. Genesis 2, 4 through 6, the Lord God created. Genesis 1:1, God created. Genesis 1:2, without form and void was the realm in which God created. Genesis 2, 4 through 6, the Lord God created. And the context of the setting here is that there is nothing. It is void. It is empty. There is nothing here. There was not even a man present to do anything for the Lord God. There may be a man present to do something for God, but not the Lord God. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 play off of each other. Genesis 1 Genesis 1 transitions into Genesis 2 because Genesis 2 is the continuation of the story. And you have to pay attention to the setting because creation, according to the mind inspiring this work, creation does not take place without emptiness. Creation does not take place without conflict. Creation does not take place without chaos. Where we see chaos in Genesis 1 and then creation thereafter, we have to be able to understand chaos in Genesis 2 and creation thereafter. It just so happens, though, that the creation of Genesis 2 is not the same as Genesis 1. Why? What I wanted to highlight here is that the creation of Genesis 2 takes place from out of the dust of the ground. What is the dust? Remember, whoever's writing this, Genesis 1, Genesis 2, Genesis 3, they are not there when it's taking place. This is not historical. This is a stream of thought. This is vision. This is revelation. This is as if a dream. This is as if we are reading a dream. That's what this is. This isn't literal. This isn't real. This is as if we are reading a dream, and it has to be interpreted in that context. So looking at Genesis 13, 15, and 16. Genesis 13, 15, and 16. What is dust? What is dust? Genesis 13, 15, and 16. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. To the Bible's mind, seed means dust, dust means seed. Seed means dust, dust means seed. Genesis 28, 13 and 14. Genesis 28, 13 and 14. And behold, the Lord God stood above it, and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land wherein thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, to the east, to the north, to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Seed means dust. More than seed, Genesis 28, 13, and 14 lets us know that seed can also be looked at as families. Families. Seed, dust, families, same thing. Isaiah 40, 15. Isaiah 40, 15. Behold, the nations are as a drop of a bucket and are counted as the small dust of the balance. Behold, he taketh of the isles as a very little thing. Again, dust, seed, families. Correct word here is nations. Seed are nations. Dust, nations. These families are nations, and not nations as in political. This is nations, denominations. That's what the dust is. The dust equals denominations.
Our faith is alive. Our belief is a living structure. But what does it mean to have a working faith? What does it mean to have a belief assisting our thoughts and feelings? A Faith That Works is a book informing its reader on how to cultivate an active faith. We usually have to make our faith work. We usually need to do something in order for us to feel like our faith is alive. Is this the right way to handle our devotional experience? Find correct guidance and instruction on how to carry the body of your faith in A Faith That Works.
The book of Isaiah, still in the book of Isaiah, moving a chapter forward, Isaiah 41 and verse 2. Isaiah 41 and verse 2. Who raised up the righteous man from the east, called him to his foot, gave the nations before him, and made him rule over kings. He gave them as the dust to his sword. He gave them, the nations, to this one raised up as the dust to his sword, and as driven stubble to his bow. When we're hearing man, when we're hearing Adam was created from the dust, this isn't literal dust. This is not literal dust. Dust equals seed. Seed equals families. Families equal nations. These are denominations because the context of the Bible is not political. The context of the Bible is ultimately philosophical and religious. These are denominations. So hearing that one was formed from the dust, we should understand that one was formed from denominations, not literal dust. But it was dust of the ground. And that's where the context of the setting in Genesis 2 from Genesis 1 concerning creation out of chaos, out of conflict, out of destruction, out of nothingness. That's where this kicks in. Because he was formed out of the dust of the ground, out of the nations of the ground. When you see that in the context of Genesis 2, there's emptiness. When you see that there's emptiness around in this vision or in this illustration, we're pointed to some thoughts of what that emptiness means, because we know that from Genesis 1 and verse 2 that emptiness is brought on by a destruction to a Jerusalem. Genesis 2 begins in the same way. Genesis 2 begins in the same emptiness from Genesis 1. Looking at Isaiah 26, 4 and 5. Isaiah 26, 4 and 5. Trust you in the Lord forever, for in the Lord is everlasting strength. For he bringeth down them that dwell on high. The lofty city he layeth it low. He layeth it low, even to the ground. He bringeth it even to the dust. This term ground, the context of which it is, with Genesis 1 being the context of what it is, with its same language used and found in Jeremiah 4, verse 23, well, we can understand that a raising meaning a lowering or a bringing down to the ground, is the context here, just as it was as the earth was without form and void. Isaiah 29, 3 and 4. Isaiah 29, 3 and 4. Isaiah 29, 3 and 4. And I will camp against thee round about, and will lay siege against thee with a mount, and I will raise forts against thee. And thou shalt be brought down, and shalt speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as one of that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground, and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust. So the Bible is again exchanging ground for dust. And the context that the Bible is exchanging ground for dust in is through conflict, is through destruction, is through a bringing down of enemies. Isaiah 47 and 1. Isaiah 47 and 1. Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground. There is no throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate. Now I'm highlighting this context of dust because I'm highlighting this context of the ground, due to the context of the dust, due to the context established by the author writing the book of Genesis in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. Genesis 1, verse 2 is talking about the earth being without form and void. Jeremiah 4, verse 23 gives us the answer as to why that is, because a Jerusalem has been destroyed and cut down. Genesis chapter 2, building off of Genesis 1, the theme of creation, and that creation does not start without chaos. Creation does not begin unless there is nothing to begin it. Genesis 2 begins in the same sort of manner, where there is nothingness around, and yet creation is taking place. Yet it is not general creation. It is not general creation in Genesis chapter 2. It is actually a revival or a regeneration. Genesis 2 beginning in the same type of setting as Genesis 1 and verse 2, with conflict, with, I should say, the outcome or the aftermath. We're seeing the aftermath. The land in vision in Genesis 2 is appearing barren. There's nothing there to do anything for anyone. There's nothing to be, and nothing is established. All there is a mist going on to cover the land, to cover the ground, to do whatever work needs to be done. Figurative language there, but the point being is that there is emptiness and void. There is void there. There is the same chaos from Genesis 1 and then creation to Genesis 2, chaos, emptiness, void, to creation. Yet the creation isn't the same, because the one that is to be created is created from out of the dust of the ground. Created from out of the dust of the ground. Genesis 1 establishes what the ground is. Male and female establish what the ground is. Male and female establish what the ground is, and it is that ground that is to rule and to subdue and to overpower and control everything therein. Genesis 2 comes in, and all of a sudden the same setting from Genesis 1 is brought into Genesis 2. The same emptiness that we see before the one created or regenerated is found. That same void, that same emptiness, that same nothingness, for the creation not of God, but of the Lord God. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are connected. What you're seeing in Genesis 2, between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there is a history there. The author writing Genesis does not record that history occurring between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 for the emptiness in Genesis 2 to be as it is, but there is a scene there, and a scene similar to Jeremiah 4:23, a scene there similar to Jeremiah 4 verse 10, a scene there similar to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2. It is from that scene that one is then taken from the dust of the ground, that one is then taken from the nations of the chief nation. One is then taken from the nations, from the denominations of the chief nation, and is regenerated. Not literally. Job 33, 3 and 4. Job 33, 3 and 4. Job 33, 3 and 4. My words shall be of the uprightness of my heart, and my lips shall utter knowledge clearly. The Spirit of God hath made me, and the breath of the Almighty hath given me life. Remember, he gave him breath and became a living soul. Well, that breath that was given was spirit. That breath that was given was spirit. Isaiah 44, 2 and 3. Isaiah 44, 2 and 3. Thus saith the Lord that made thee and formed thee from the womb, which will help thee. Fear not, O Jacob, my servant, and thou, Jeshurun, whom I have chosen. For I will pour water upon him that is thirsty, and floods upon the dry ground. I will pour my spirit upon thy seed, and my blessing upon thine offering. Whatever this spirit is, Isaiah 44, 2 and 3 lets us know that it is the blessing of the living God. What is that blessing? What is that spirit? How is this creation taking place? By spirit. Proverbs 1, 22 and 23. Proverbs 1, 22 and 23. How long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? and the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Turn you at my reproof. Behold, I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you. I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you. I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you. When spirit is being received, words are being received. To have the breath of life, as Job says, that breath that gave him life was actually the spirit that gave him life. The spirit that gave him life was no superstitious or any sort of fanatical thing. That was actually words. Words are what form that individual from the dust of the ground.
Embark on a voyage through the veils of prophecy with Heaven's Genuine and Counterfeit Ministry. Peer into the shadows of time as this book unveils the Earth Beast's journey. From its enigmatic origins to its astonishing expansion. See how the Earth Beast skillfully weaves a web of false religious ideology. Its aim set on seizing universal religious and political dominion. But that's not the end of the story. Heaven's Genuine and Counterfeit Ministry exposes prophecy's veiled truths, empowering you to discern authenticity from artifice. In addition to learning about the character of the Earth Beast, find out how this book is your companion, being a shield against spiritual manipulation. Unearth the enigma, challenge the illusion, and discover the Earth Beast and its quest for dominance. The decision rests with you. Are you prepared to unravel the truth?
We have a very full scene in Genesis 2. When you can take the pieces and put them together, you can actually see this scene in Genesis 2. The scene in Genesis 2, one born from the dust of the ground. One born from the dust of the ground. That ground there, that ground being the ground established from Genesis 1. That ground established from Genesis 1. That ground is actually the ground of the image of God. The ground of the image of God. And according to the surrounding verses concerning what ground and dust have to do with one another, it is a particular regime, it is a particular nation using or abusing the image of God that has somehow been brought down to the dust of the ground, or has been brought down as the dust of the ground. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, they build off of one another with their center, that space there between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. That's the telling of the events of an Exodus. That is the telling of the downfall of a regime and of an individual assembly, because Adam does not mean in context man, literal man. Adam means assembly. This is group. This is mankind. This is a kind of man, as we talked about before. Nothing changes. From out of the ground, an assembly was born from out of the nations. And from out of the nations, they proceeded forth and entered out into a land of their own, of which the author of Genesis in chapter 2 calls Eden. Familiar story. From out of Egypt, they entered into the wilderness and entered into Canaan. Same story. Same story. Same story because it's the same event. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are the same history. They are the same ecclesiastical history, one playing off of the other. And the Exodus from Genesis 2, when you line up the illustrations therein, showing the underlying philosophy within the scriptures. So the blueprint of the religious world is, yes, the blueprint is the image of God. And male and female, using the image of God, are to do whatever they are supposed to do pertaining to their natures. Sure. But just because that's the blueprint, that does not mean that that's the way it is and that's the way it's supposed to be, because Genesis 2 comes in to elaborate on the regeneration of an assembly of minds from out of the nations, crafted and formed from Genesis chapter 1 through the religious law, whether they are male or female, or whether they are both male and female, that combination taking place. which is the combination that Paul calls the mystery of iniquity. This assembly rose up out of it, and rising up out of it, received that Spirit. And that Spirit, again, this isn't alluding to anything superstitious, anything extraterrestrial. This is the outpouring of words upon their understanding. Receiving the outpouring of words of understanding, which words have to do with, most likely, the image of God and the way that male and female are created and maintaining themselves being false. They're moving out of it. They have moved out of it. They are out of it into a place of their own, and for holding sanctuary and assembly and fellowship as the spirit of those words has informed them. So when I'm always connecting Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 together, when I'm always talking about Genesis 2 being the revelation of the more preferable or the more suitable way to carry our conversation, well, that's because the Bible's speech articulates that fact. Once you get down to the illustrations there and let them speak for themselves, the Bible articulates this. The Bible lets us know what's wrong first off, and then gives us the illustration of, well, we might want to hold off on that and understand what an outpouring of words is supposed to be doing, as opposed to maintaining the conversation by a set script, by the conscience of mankind or of priest kind, to own a conversation that is entirely well for both the personal and the devotional life.